So there's just a few questions that came from the crowd. What percentage of valve-sparing aortic root repairs eventually go on to need replacement of the valve?
Thanks for this question. It's actually a very, vividly discussed problem among professionals. So the reason the valve sparing roots are performed is that despite some percent of patients needing a replacement in the future of the valve, and it's about 15 to 20%, and depending on the center and the volume of the center and experience of the operating surgeons, it can be as good and as low as 5% or as high as 25 to 30%. And it also depends on the type of the valve. If it's a tri-leaflet valve, symmetrical, healthy valve, it can be really low single-digit percent. And with bicuspid valve, the durability of the valve is lower, even though at the time of surgery we create a more symmetrical and better functional valve that still consists of two leaflets or two cusps, but is more durable than the nature kind of made it. The reason we perform the valve sparing root surgery versus a composite root replacement, which is the combination of the valve with attached graft to it, is that based on all the data that we look at in terms whether it's retrospective reviews of multiple reports from different centers or data coming from probably the largest center for aortic surgery, Cleveland Clinic, there is a survival benefit with valve sparing root replacement. And it has to do with the quality of blood dynamics going through the aortic valve and ability of the heart to function in as physiological conditions as possible. The key thing, honestly, with this operation is that it has to be done let me put it this way, it needs to be done at a high volume aortic center because it is a challenging operation, and it requires a lot of data upfront from echocardiographers, from cardiologists that built the imaging part, and then the obviously surgical expertise is important, and follow up again with between the surgery and cardiology groups.
These two are, I think, kind of related. Is there a non-invasive way to repair the aortic root, and any new information about robotic surgeries for the aorta?
So it's again good question. Aortic root at this point, we do not have any FDA-approved device, or there is no device in Europe that is approved for aneurysmal roots. There is some case reports that are coming out from high volume centers. Currently, there is few devices being at the very preliminary stages of building so-called what we call endobental, so doing transcatheter valve in combination with conduit and stents that would go into the coronary vessels, because as you remember from our presentations, it's a very complex structure. At this point, we do not have anything that is working well yet. It probably will come within the next few years to a decade. The results of root surgery, again, at experienced places is so good that it will be a very long way before it will become a approved or a standard of care solution, unless we will be looking at patients that are either high risk or prohibitive surgical candidates. But it will come, we believe, at some point. That it will be a parallel way to address that. I'm sorry, was there another question? I forgot. Robotic. Robotic surgery has its place mostly in has its use mostly in mitral repair surgery. There is few centers of excellence in the country. We are not one of that. It is equally good as regular sternotomy or mini thoracotomy approaches without the robot. Meaning the repair rate and durability is good as regular repair in experienced hands at experienced centers. There is no major benefit other than faster recovery comparing to sternotomy, but recovery from mini thoracotomy approach, which is the approach from the side between the ribs, which we do at our center, the results are similar. There is no use at this point of robotic surgery for aortic or aortic root operations. And the reason for it is that the complexity of structuring the blood flow through the body and cannulation strategies for the brain, for the heart is so advanced that robot becomes much more cumbersome, and it probably would not be a safe tool at this stage.
I actually don't know the data behind these questions, but in terms of bicuspid aortic valve and ascending aortic aneurysm, what percentage of BAVs have to be replaced, and then what percentage of patients actually show progression of ascending dilation?
So the first question has to do with what percent of patients with bicuspid valve have an aortopathy?
No, what percentage of BAV end up having to replace the valve?
Yeah, I'm not sure that we have any data on that. I think I've seen ranges on the estimates of how many people, and I think it has to do with definitions of what constitutes dilation. But I'd say a rough rule might be 50% might have some amount of dilation with bicuspid valve. What was the second question?
What percentage of them have aneurysms that grow with BAV? I don't know
I think that's similar. So I guess one way of looking at that question would be, if you replace the valve, does the patient go on to require a subsequent aortic operation? That would be uncommon, I believe, in my experience, if it's addressed properly. The usual rule of thumb is if somebody has a bicuspid valve or any valve that's replaced and the aorta is 4.5, generally it's recommended that we repair it at the same time. And I think if you follow that rule, I think it would be uncommon for the aorta to grow after the valve has been replaced. Carl, any thoughts?
We don't exactly also know what percentage, because we truly don't know the denominator, because we don't study the whole population, obviously, of people in the world. There are bicuspid aortic valves, and those are usually the ones that are very symmetrical, that sometimes we find in patients in their 7th, 8th, and 9th decade of life that actually are completely functional and never degenerate. But a lot of them, bicuspid valves, are asymmetrical and are two out of three cusps are fused, and the flow through the valve is not very laminar, it's turbulent, and they degenerate. But as I said, we really don't know the true denominator in the human population other than the pathology studies that were mentioned before. So I'm not sure what would be the percent that actually degenerate, but we see the pathology in bicuspid valve more often, obviously, and at earlier ages.
If someone has a pacemaker, and this was specifically to address vasovagal syncope, are there any considerations or interferences if you need an upcoming valve or specifically mitral valve repair?
Not a mitral repair. Very often mitral valve pathology is associated with tricuspid valve pathology, and if this patient has existing pacemaker, there are some I would say technical aspects of the repair or replacement that have to be taken under consideration, potentially lead adjustment in terms of the place in the heart. But the mitral valve itself is not, mitral valve repair or replacement is not affected by the presence of the pacemaker.
So question for Dr. Moody, how long would you want to wait after a pacemaker before you would do the heart operation? So I guess the only concern would be is if the pacemaker was recent, you would want it to heal. So some period of time. I'm not sure exactly how many weeks, but it would be a small number if it's a recent 6 weeks. Yeah.
To avoid, I'm guessing, displacement.
Right.
Are there any restrictions after aneurysm surgery for daily living?
Other than the time of sternotomy healing, which is usually 6 to 8 weeks, then we allow patients to basically return to normal activities. We do follow up those patients with imaging studies to make sure that the suture lines are properly healed. There's no recurrence of any type of aneurysmal disease in other portions of the aorta, or there is no problem with the repair itself. And if it's at this stage, if it's properly addressed and there is nothing left from the aneurysmal disease, actually people can return to normal lifestyle. If it's part of the connective tissue disorder syndrome, that may be a different story, because there may be different aneurysmal disease elsewhere in other parts of the body, or in general aorta and vessels may be somewhat weakened. So that's a different question. But after, let's say, replacing the ascending aortic aneurysm with the Dacron graft, as long as it's completely replaced, there is no restrictions in terms of the physical activity after the incisions are healed.
And from a connective tissue standpoint, our usual guidelines are, moderation in terms of cardiovascular activity, but we try to recommend, or we do recommend, avoidance of contact competitive sports, exercising to exhaustion, and then your isometrics or weightlifting. So push-ups, pull-ups, or sit-ups, where you're really doing closing off your windpipe.
Yeah, I would agree, and I would say it depends what you mean by that too, because we have patients that want to really push the limits of what they do, and some of those things are addressed in that American Heart guideline I said for athletics. So it depends what people consider part of normal lifestyle. There's certain athletics that are, I would say, fine, and then I think where people have pushed the limits. I mean, there were the same year Fred Hoiberg had his surgery, there were 2 other NBA players that had surgery and went on to play in the NBA, and I'm not sure that I would have approved that if they came to me, but there is a spectrum of what's okay. But I agree with what you said, Christian.
This is a tough one. I don't know if we have answers for this either, but my aneurysm repair was planned. Why do I not qualify for life insurance? Life insurance. No, not health insurance. So there's, I talk from a genetic standpoint, and I think because it's a big unknown whether there could be more disease that could happen, whether you're at higher risk for a dissection after repair. What is the reason why, if you were a generally healthy young person, that you had it, and could there be subsequent sequela that would probably put you at higher risk?
Right, and it seems to me, and I'm not an expert on this, but it seems like there's different, and it may be a corollary of like genetic testing, right? So health insurance is one thing, but life insurance, I think they operate under their own principles, and I think it's just a separate business, really. They don't want to take they want to take low risk.
I mean, we have written letters to insurance, even for like Marfan syndrome patients, and said like they're very compliant with their medications, they get their surveillance on time, they're post-repair. We don't expect complications. Whether that's helped them get life insurance or not, I'm uncertain, but we've attempted. Can one have more aneurysms if ascending is repaired and bicuspid aortic valve is performing beautifully? So I guess in BAV and aneurysm, is there other aneurysms that could occur?
Yeah, occasionally we do see distal enlargement. I do like to image after the repair. Certainly you can see little pseudoaneurysms develop at the distal extent of where the repair goes. Every once in a while, we do see that the aorta dilates distally to where the repair was. I would say overall, that's less common.
I would like to comment on it. Currently, we believe that bicuspid aortic valve pathology extends all the way to the proximal aortic arch, and that's where it really ends. So in patients that are good candidates for a little more aggressive or extensive approach, many aortic centers, many aortic surgeons prefer to remove the ascending aorta with kind of the proximal part of beginning of the aortic arch, which is same type of connection, same type of the suture line, but it's done under circulatory arrest with hypothermia and different perfusion strategy. This way, truly the whole aortic tissue that exists in the ascending aorta is completely gone. So patients that can tolerate this type of operation, which is majority actually of patients that qualify for open heart surgery, we tend to be a little more aggressive to avoid dilation of the distal portion of the ascending aorta. So that's one of the strategies to mitigate this problem. And I also would like to stress that regarding the insurance question, that we do repair aneurysms to mitigate the dissection. So this is why we do it. That's really the goal.
The Bentall procedure, what does it entail and who gets this procedure?
I would certainly hope that I explained it, but it was a very fast, probably presentation. So Bentall operation is the operation for aortic root aneurysm with the aortic valve that cannot be saved. So the aortic valve that can be saved and the aortic root is dilated, like a typical young Marfan patient, we would prefer to do valve-sparing root replacement. If the valve is not functional, it's either too weak, or it's leaky, or it's stenotic and calcified, then we do Bentall operation. So it's either tissue or mechanical composite, which means the valve is connected to the root, to the new graft, and then it's replaced from the very bottom, bottom of the aorta, connected directly to the heart, and then distally to the aortic arch. So that's a Bentall operation. So it's a root replacement.
So last question, which is very specific, but here we go. This individual has a friend that lives in a different country that had a Dacron graft put in. He reports that the graft reverberates through the entire body, and he feels like he's getting punched in the throat, quote unquote, every heartbeat. His doctors at home are saying just get used to it. And a second opinion here by a U.S. surgeon said something about potentially needing an artificial pericardium over the graft. Have you heard of this or any insight?
Is there any information how long ago the operation was?
7 months ago.
Or you can talk together after.
I'm just trying to respond for him.
It could be potentially. We just I just asked Dr. Harris here. That could be potentially the inflammation that is around the heart, which is called post-cardiorrheumy syndrome or Dressler syndrome. So it's basically like inflammation in the pericardium. I'm not sure if that's what they're referring to. It is a little far out, and there's medications to treat it, basically like ibuprofen type of medications. So I'm not sure. I mean, it's hard to say remotely.
I think that's all the questions. Thank you to all the speakers this morning, and I'll hand it off to Amy.
Well, look at that. We ended up back on time. So again, we are very new at this. Rock from the Heart, we just started it. We got our nonprofit status. This past summer, we applied in June. The IRS approved us in August. Kind of lightning fast, but we were thrilled. Our goal is to do more events like this to connect people. I think after last year's, it was Dr. Harris who said, and Dr. Campbell told me that kind of one of the coolest things was being able to talk to these people. I know I wish Dr. Campbell could have been here because we've talked on. And I didn't go with Pete to his last appointment. It's the first time in a few years that I wasn't there too. But he talks to his patients now, and he told us, he goes, before we had this event last year, I didn't know that there were people like Pete that were living their life in 6 months chunks. They were living their life from scan to scan. So our goal, again, is just to do this again next year and keep connecting patients. We always want to do better. We're very new at putting this together. I did a lot of the work myself. I don't know what I'm doing. I hope I pulled it off. I hope you learned something from this, made some connections. They're setting up for cocktails right now, so I know some of you were going to stay for dinner. Some of you were just signed up for the symposium, but please take a moment. Thank our sponsors. If you're a sponsor, Minneapolis Heart Institute, would you guys please stand up for us? Thank you for being here and being a part of this. Christopher Layton. Now the doctor. Our team from Heart Valve Disease Awareness Day, Alliance for Aging, if you guys could please stand up, thank you for being here. Gretchen, all the way from Baltimore, to come to speak, and Dr. Bowen, who came from Mayo to speak. We have so many people to thank, so please, make sure you thank all the people who made this possible. Follow us on Facebook, rockfromtheheart.org. We're making this up as we go along, and we can't do this without your support, so let's do it again. Thanks for being here, everybody.